Hello YouTube! We're on the real programming channel about HTML and CSS for beginners. My name is Andrei. This is our 73 lesson about using absolute positioning, changing the Starbuzz CSS. And this is our 73 lesson. I greet you, welcome on my channel. Let's go start learning this. We are now going to create a two-column Starbuzz page using techniques similar to those we used with the float version of the page. However, this time we'll use absolute positioning. Here is what we're going to do. First, we're going to make the sidebar div absolutely positioned. In fact, we're going to position it in exactly the same place that we floated it to before. Next, we are going to give the main content another big margin so that the sidebar can sit on top of the margin space. Finally, we are going to give this a good testing and see how it compares to the float version. Okay, changing the Starbuzz CSS. Our HTML is all ready to go and sidebar div is right where we want it. Below the imported main, all we need to do make a few CSS changes and we'll have the sidebar that is absolutely positioned. Okay, remember, we are going back to the original version of the files, which you can find in the chapter 11 absolute folder. You can work out of the absolute folder or copy the files index.html and Starbuzz CSS into the Starbuzz folder and work from there like we did. Okay, now we are going to specify that the sidebar is absolutely positioned 128 pixels from the top and 0 pixels from the right of the page. We also want the sidebar to have weight, so let's make it the same as the float version 280 pixels. You'll see where the 128 come from in a sec. There are pixels from the right. We'll make sure that the sidebar sticks to the right side of the browser. Now we just need to rework the main div. Actually, there are not much reworking to be done. We are just adding a margin like we did with the float version. So change the right margin of the main div to be 330 pixels like you did last time. We are going to give the sidebar some space to be positioned over by giving the main div big margin. This really is the same technique we used with the float. The only difference is the main way the sidebar div is being placed over the margin. All you need to do is make that change to your margin and then save. But before we take this for a test drive, let's think about how this is going to work with absolutely positioned sidebar. We reposition the sidebar to be 128 pixels from the top and up against the right side of the page. Keep in mind the sidebar has 10 pixels of margin on the right, so the background color will show toward that like before. 10 pixels top margin, 180 pixels for the header. You can see this height that is set in the CSS, 10 pixels bottom margin. The sidebar needs to be 128 pixels from the top because that's exactly how much room the header takes up, including margin. And the main div is float just below the header, so it will align with the top of the sidebar. Also, it has the right margin that is the same size as the sidebar, so all its inline content will be to the left of the sidebar. Remember that the float elements don't know about the absolutely positioning elements at all, so the inline content in the float elements doesn't wrap around the absolutely positioning element. You might want to think about what happens to the footer because float elements don't know about absolutely elements. We can't use clear anymore. Time for the absolute test drive. Make sure you save the new CSS and then reload index.html in your browser. Let's check out the results. Wow, this looks amazingly like the fluid version, however, you know that the sidebar is being positioned absolutely. As you resize the browsers, the sidebar always sits 128 pixels from the top and stick to the right of the page. The main content area has the right margin that is exactly the weight of the sidebar, and the sidebar sits on the top of that space. And the sidebar has 10 pixels right margin, so it has spacing between it and the edge of the page. And we still got a nice gutter between the two columns. But we are now back to having a problem with the footer. When the browser gets wide enough, the absolutely positioned sidebar comes down over the top of the footer. Unfortunately, we can fall back on the clear property this time, because slowed elements ignore the presence of absolutely positioned element. When the browser is wide, the vertical space of the main content area is reduced, and the sidebar can come down over the footer. Okay, enough already. All we're trying to do is create two columns. Why can't I just write some HTML or CSS that easily creates two columns? Well, actually you can, and to do that you have to use a fairly new capability of modern browsers. The CSS table display. What's that? CSS table display allows you to display block elements in a table with rows and columns. You'll see how in just a second. By putting your content in a CSS table, you can easily create multi-column design with HTML and CSS. How if you are thinking, why didn't you tell us about this before? Well, it was important for you to understand how browsers flow and display content, because not our design task is going to look like two-column display. But now that you understand layouts, we can rework the page using CSS table displays. At this point, all modern browsers support this. Like all the other layout solutions, even display table has its advantages and disadvantages. Okay, how CSS table display works. You can think of a table like a spread has hit. A table has column and rows, and the intersection of each column and row we have a cell. In a spreadsheet table you can put a value, like number or some text in each cell. With CSS table display, each cell contains an HTML block element instead. This is the first column. This is the first row. In each cell we can place an element like a div. In this table we have 4 rows and 3 columns for a total of 20 cells. Let's say you got a page with 3 images and 3 paragraphs, and did you want to lay them out in 2 columns with 3 rows. Here's how you do that conceptually using a table. This is the first column. And this is table. We have 3 rows and 2 columns for a total of 6 cells. And this is the first row. In each cell we can place a block element. The table will automatically expand to accommodate the cell widths and heights. Notice that because we only put block elements into a table, we wrapped the images in a div. Exercise. Given that what you know about CSS table displays, sketch out how the 2 columns from the Starbuzz page main and sidebar would fit into a table. Check the answer at the end of this lesson chapter. Before moving on. For example, draw your table. So here to create the CSS and the HTML for a table display. As you can imagine, we're going to need to add some CSS to tell the browser to display our columns like a table. But we also need to add some HTML. Why? We need to add a bit of structure that represents the columns and rows of the table and the structure of the closing table as well. Doing this is straightforward. All we need to do is create a div for the entire table and then one div per row. And for each column we just need a block level element that is placed within the row of div. Let's see how the HTML is going to work, and then we'll come back to the CSS we need. And adding HTML structure for the table display We'll talk about this in the next lesson. Or not. Yeah. In this lesson, let's step out how we are going to add structure to support the CSS table display using. First, we will create a div that represent the entire tables and underneath the columns and rows within that div. Okay. Second step. Next, for each row in the table, we'll create another div that will contain the row of content. For Starbuzz, we have only the row. And for each column, we just need a block element to act as that column. We already have two block elements. We can use the main div and the sidebar div. Sharpen your pencil. Now it's your turn. Go ahead and write the HTML you'll need for the table structure for Starbuzz below. Write the HTML we'll need for the Starbuzz table display layout in your sheet of paper. Okay. How to use CSS to create table display, and we'll talk about this in the next lesson. And this is our 73 lesson are over. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel, please. Put likes, share with friends, comment. Eat bananas, drink more water for the brains, and do exercise in the evening after you have done all the work. For example, practice regularly. Thank you. Bye.